Welcome to the next episode in the Compliance Factory's conversations about anti-money laundering. My name's Adam Samuel, and I'm here with remediation project expert Malachy McClelland to talk about politically exposed persons, PEPs as they're known. The first obvious question is, what role do PEPs play in remediation projects?
The client will need to know if they've got exposure to PEPs, whether directly as an individual a client or whether they are a controller in a corporate entity, for example. And the reason for this is that PEPs by their nature are vulnerable to bribery and corruption.
So if we were to take a typical British politician, member of parliament, is that a politically exposed person?
Well, it would be considered a politically exposed person because of the role they play and because of they're close to the center of power, so they would have political clout, and they could have an influence on others, and others could have an influence on them. So they could be subject to bribery and corruption. And
we're typically looking also at close relatives of these people.
So PEP by definition is the politically exposed person plus close family members or close business associates, so they would become PEPs by association.
So the entire Johnson family at the moment is politically exposed?
Yes, there would be. His brothers, his sisters, his parents, yes, would all be politically exposed.
And to what extent do firms have problems handling politically exposed persons that generate remediation projects?
Well, there's a requirement to ensure that you know what exposure you have to PEPs, and that you then must identify those PEPs and then keep a register of those PEPs. And once you've done that, they will almost certainly lead to the client being higher risk, and as a result of that, the client will be subject to enhanced due diligence.
Now, are there higher and lower high-risk PEPs in this respect, if we take all PEPs as being high-risk customers?
But yes, I mean, you mentioned earlier about UK PEPs, and a member of parliament might be considered lower risk, say a lower risk PEP than, say, a member of a royal family in a high-risk jurisdiction. They could be considered higher risk. Having said that, that's up to the individual companies to whether they place these PEPs and what risk appetite they have and how they've established the risk rating of the client. But not generally speaking, all PEPs would be considered high risk for the purposes of doing due diligence.
But is there a problem where a firm has failed to distinguish between low risk PEPs and higher risk PEPs?
Well, I mean, they're part of the way there. They've established that the individual is a PEP in the first place, but they then have to decide whether that risk is acceptable to them or not, whether they've got an appetite to accept the risk that this PEP brings to the firm. So they will have to decide on an individual basis what level of due diligence they do in the client, or whether or not even to accept the client, or whether to. And if they establish that it is the client has. An existing client has this PEP connection, do they continue with the client or do they exit?
Yes, because isn't one of the problems here that people become PEPs as their relations reach power, as they reach power in particular places or become of influence? So somebody who may have been correctly taken on board as a low-risk customer suddenly becomes a high-risk customer when they become a PEP.
That's right, but there is a requirement to continue with ongoing monitoring. So you're not just required to screen the client base at the outset, at the onboarding. You have a requirement to continually monitor the client base and to identify any PEPs any clients that become connected to PEPs as the relationship continues.
What's the typical weakness that is spotted on a remediation project in this area?
Well, I think that perhaps maybe not clarity around who a firm will consider a PEP. That has to be a first point. You have to clarify who you consider a PEP and have a robust definition of what a PEP is. and then to have a robust screening system, not maybe just by using the normal screening process, which may be WorldCheck, certainly would use a screening tool, but also to ensure that there are other ways of identifying PEPs, maybe in the public domain, doing internet searches, for example. So you have to establish what a PEP is, and then to make sure you've captured them.
And you get companies that simply either don't have clear procedures in the first place, or do have the nice procedures, but then can't implement them.
That's
in
right.
practice.
That's right. Sometimes the correct procedures are not in place in the first place, or that they're not being properly followed, or they don't have systems robust enough and screening systems robust enough to capture who the PEPs are.
So if you are a PEP, what enhanced due diligence can you expect to get?
Well, normally you would expect to know this person's further, as well as knowing their individual personal details. You'd want to know, how they've acquired their wealth, even around the source of the funds, the source of their wealth. You'd want to actually establish whether there's any adverse media around them, so you do some searches in that connection. So you'd want to know a little bit more about them than you would say on a lower risk client.
And that adverse media screening itself is part of the job of handling a PEP, is what bad things are being said about the ethics or propriety of particular individuals.
Well, you'd want to know if there's any adverse media around the PEP, and generally speaking, companies are screening for adverse media in their client across their client base. But on onboarding, it would certainly be a matter of course you do on your higher risk clients, including PEPs, you do a adverse screening check, and you do that on an ongoing basis.
To finish, does this screening for PEPs actually save the world much money laundering in real life?
I doubt it, but I doubt in practice it saves a lot on money laundering, but it's a requirement. It could potentially be very, very risky not to know who your PEPs are from anti-bribery and corruption perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you.